Go. So you're on.
Okay. Well, then I guess we will start. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Black, and I'm one of the Rogue Women Writers. We're a group of 6 thriller writers whose backgrounds range from intelligence officer to journalism to psychotherapists to White House strategists. To let you know how this is going to go, for you participants in the Zoom room, you will be in the gallery during the reading. We encourage you to introduce yourselves by typing your name, any contact information in the chat bar. For those of you joining us on Facebook Live, please comment if you have anything you'd like to tell the authors, and especially if you have a question you'd like to ask. The comments will be monitored and relayed so the authors can answer them in real time. The authors will be reading only briefly, so we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. All of the books discussed here tonight should be available through your local bookstore. Let's all use the hashtags Rogue Reads and Rogue Women Writers as we post about our experiences with these authors and their works. As I said, my name is Lisa Black, and I am the author of 15 novels featuring forensic specialists, which also happens to be my day job. I am based here in Florida, working with my local police department, and I am beside myself with excitement to be emceeing this event. Now, none of the following people need an introduction. Their list of awards, degrees, honors, and books published is way too long, but since that's my job here, I'm going to give extremely brief intros so we can have more time to hear from them. After we go through everyone, then we'll circle back to hear all about their new books. Now, Baltimore born and bred, Laura Lippman is the daughter of a journalist and a librarian whose sister is a bookseller. She was a reporter for 20 years before winning just about every major award in mystery writing, and is married to David Simon, who created what I think was the best thing ever on television, The Wire. Laura's new protagonist, Jerry, likes Hydrox cookies and unsweet iced tea. Hydrox, not Oreo? I mean, seriously?
Well, he grew up in a household where their money was tight, so they economized where they could.
Oh, that's true. I've been there too. Eaten many a Hydrox. Okay, like I suspect many of us, she still loves newspapers, but wrote the first Tess Monahan book while considering work as a PI, concerned that the newspaper business might be entering hard times. So Laura, when did you see the tsunami approaching?
I never saw it. I only saw that I might lose my job because at the time we're talking about, it was the 1990s. The Baltimore Sun at that time had never had a layoff, but things were getting bad. I was at the very bottom of the seniority list, and I realized that I literally had no idea what else I could do for a living. And I had a desk mate, a wonderful man, Frank Roylance. I just like to say his name because he's one of the best people I've ever known. And Frank had been approached by a private detective who said, you know, you could do what I do. You have a lot of the same skill set. So I always said I didn't solve the problem for myself, but I solved the problem for a parallel, you know, an alter ego, excuse me. And, you know, it's sort of like, okay, if I don't have a journalism job, what do I do for a living? And it was like, I guess I could be some kind of an investigator, but I would be self-taught. And that's where the Tess Monahan novels came from. I wrote a book a year for 7 years. And at the end of that 7 years, I was able to leave newspapers and support myself full time. And I don't mean to say that it was like some grand, huge lottery ticket contract. But at the time, the rule of thumb was that if you could get a contract that was 1/3 more than what you were making in a day job, you could probably swing it. It would compensate for what you would lose in terms of pension, benefits, vacation time, sick time, just 1/3 more, and you were set. And it worked out for me really well. And I was able to leave, and I was able to become a full-time novelist, which I try to be conscious every day that was the dream. And I'm really, really grateful that I got to live that dream.
That's wonderful. That's very interesting. I didn't know about that third formula. Okay, our next author, Andrea Bartz, is a former journalist who has worked at Glamour and Psychology Today, and whose work has appeared in numerous outlets. Andrea lives in Brooklyn, but is a Wisconsin girl at heart and loves fresh cheese curds, the kind that squeak against your teeth. And her family makes the fresh maple syrup that she uses in the perfect old-fashioned.
Yes, cheers. Cheers. It's a Wisconsin staple.
The first novel Andrea wrote, The Last Night, was not only published, but named as one of the best books of the year by 7 different outlets. So tell me, why should we not hate you? Okay, kidding. But here's the serious question. For a former travel writer, where is your favorite place to travel in the world?
Wow. It's a huge question and I still don't have a clear answer, but I'm a huge fan of Central Europe, and there's a lot more exploring I want to do in Central and South America. So I don't know, everywhere I haven't been is the short answer.
Well, that's a good one. Okay, our next author, I'm going to come back to you. Our next author is Dr. Kathy Reichs, and I have both published books named Trace Evidence, but there the similarities end. Kathy splits her time between North Carolina and Quebec and is a forensic anthropologist of outstanding credentials, including such real-world work as with the identification of war dead from World War II in Korea, genocide in Rwanda, and recovering remains from the 9/11 attack. But in the fictional world, she delights us with the Temperance Brennan series, from which the TV show Bones was adapted. Kathy tells us that Temperance Brennan doesn't drink, but she does love a good brownie. And, of course, who doesn't? And my question for you is, I assume you are bilingual. Is French something you learned as a child or at a young age, or did you have to learn it when you went to Montreal? And how did you wind up going to Montreal in the first place?
None of the above. I was teaching full-time at university, and I decided, don't ask me why, that any educated person should speak French. So I took a French 101 class. And it was shortly after that something called NFE, National Faculty Exchange, an offer to do that came across at a faculty meeting. You change places with a professor at another institution for a year. And there was someone at one of the English language universities in Montreal that wanted to come to my institution. So having this French 101 under my belt, I thought, mais oui, je parle français. And I applied for it and off I went. And it was during that year teaching at McGill and Concordia that the lab approached me. They wanted a forensic anthropologist who was board certified, who could also speak and work in French. So I think there was a pool of 1 and I got the job.
Well, that worked out very well.
It did. At the end of that week, we figured out a system whereby I would just go back and forth every 6 weeks or so. I commuted.
To Montreal. Well, that is really yeah. Okay, another doctor that we have tonight, Dr. Tess Gerritsen, has my eternal gratitude for giving me my first blurb, which I'm still using after 15 books. A Stanford-educated internist who started writing fiction while on maternity leave. She has also written screenplays, makes films with her son, wrote the musical score for one of her book trailers, and most recently collaborated on Choose Me with her friend Gary Braver, attacking a controversial topic with dual perspectives, in which he wrote the sections from the male suspect's point of view, and she wrote the sections from the female detective's point of view. Tess loves to snack on Cape Cod kettle-cooked potato chips and the perfect Belvedere martini. You can see, yes. You can see our website for the recipe of her martini and also Kathy's brownies. But we'll get to that. First, tell us why you made a documentary outlining the history of the pig.
Oh, so my father was a chef. I mean, he was actually a professional cook. And I grew up in a San Diego Chinese family where we ate everything. And so I was in Istanbul and wanted bacon and couldn't get bacon because, it's an Islamic country. And I began to wonder, why would anybody not eat this delicious meat? What is the point of a taboo against pork? So my son and I tried to trace that history down, and it became a mystery for us. We went talking to a lot of anthropologists. We went around the world and realized that it all came down to the essential nature of the animal itself. And so we made this movie called Magnificent Beast, and it's about the human-pig relationship over the centuries.
Well, that is definitely different. And your writing partner, Gary Braver, has degrees in physics and English and teaches at Northwestern University when he's not writing thrillers, which have been translated into other languages and optioned for film. He's not only written books, but he's written books on writing. Scuba diving off Majorca led him to write an archaeological thriller, and then he veered into biomedical thrillers. He and his wife live outside Boston. Gary's favorites are brown lager paired with Armenian string cheese and lemurian. Am I pronouncing that correct? Lemajun, which is Armenian pizza. I looked that up, and it's sort of a ground lamb with onion and pepper, tomato sauce, and a bunch of spices on like pita bread.
Right.
Is that right?
That's right.
And since your protagonist is also Armenian, he's probably his favorite too. Although
Exactly.
you said he also likes Riesling and red pepper hummus. So you said you carry around index cards and a tape recorder in case you run across anything you can use in a book. So I was wondering, like, what's the wildest thing that a student has said in class, whether they meant to or not, that you've used?
Oh my goodness.
I know it's a tough question.
I'm taking your course. By the way, it's Northeastern University, not Northwestern. Northeastern.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Everyone gets mixed up. I think the wildest thing I ever heard in my class is a modern bestsellers course. I don't like to read, but I'm going to take your course. I mean, so what do you do with a student like that? I don't like to read. I mean, you're going to read 8 novels in here, and we're going to intensely going to analyze them at the end of the semester. So I like to read now.
Well, then that was a total success.
It was a success, yes, yeah. And he got a decent grade too. Because Northeastern has a very large technical schools, engineering, et cetera, many of the students who take English courses feel they're out of their 10. And you have a lot of English majors in there too. So English majors, they're talking, but I find that the computer science people and the science majors actually turn out to be terrific readers and actually pretty good writers when they do the take-home exam. So and that kid was one of them, which is amazing.
That is very cool. Okay, now we're going to circle back and listen to some of these books that we're touching on here. So we're going to go back to Laura Lippman. In her new novel, Dream Girl, a famous novelist confined to a hospital bed, dependent on strangers, begins to receive late-night phone calls from a woman claiming to be the beautiful protagonist of his last book. Is she a deadly threat, or is he losing his mind? So, Laura, can we hear some of Dream Girl?
Yeah, I'm going to read actually from a chapter that comes about 100 pages in. And some people think this is a spoiler, but I don't. It's been highlighted in a lot of the reviews. Jerry Anderson, after mysterious phone calls and letters that no one else seems to be able to see or hear, finally decides he needs to consult a private investigator. And so the person who comes to visit him is Tess Monahan, and she's not having it. And she says after they've talked for a little while and he asks if he'll take her case, if she'll take his case, she's like, no, it's not that I don't like you. His heart soars a little. I've worked for lots of men I don't like, comes with the territory. And now his heart thuds down, down, down. He could be 16 again, listening to Mary Ellen King's earnest assurances that she liked him as a friend. And it's not that I think you're paranoid or delusional. It's just that you're 61 years old. You've been married 3 times, dated quite a bit. I mean, the most basic newspapers.com search unearths lots of information on your social life. Yet you look back over the last 20 or so years and you can think of only 2 women who might want to upset you. I'm sorry, but if you think you've gotten to the age you are, lived the life you've lived without having more potential enemies than that, you're not delusional, but you're not very self-aware. Obviously, the relationship between a PI and a client never works if the client lies to the investigator. But over the years, I've learned it also doesn't work if the client is lying to himself. I can make a more complete list if that's what you want. He says this stiffly, wanting her to know his feelings are hurt. But even as he does, his mind expands and he reconsiders the various candidates. You know, that's admirable, Tess said. Most people can't take such bluntness. So you'll investigate if I give you a full list. No. I don't want to say this. It sounds so woo-woo, but I've learned to respect my intuition about such things. I couldn't spend a lot of time in this apartment. It gives me the creeps. Don't get me wrong. It's beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. I could stare out these windows all day, but something wrong here. I felt it when I crossed the threshold. I don't know, maybe it's like the Spielberg movie where it turns out a grave has been desecrated. Only the thing that's buried beneath your beautiful apartment is jobs. Jobs. There were silos here, grain silos. There were jobs all over this peninsula. Baltimore citizens made things, put them on ships and trains. I know I should be happy seeing these big apartment buildings going up. It's property taxes. My kid goes to public school. But this place gives me the creeps big time. I could never do surveillance here. My partner would probably be cool with it. No, that's okay. He doesn't want a man's company. He doesn't need a private detective. He understands that now. He needs a friend, someone bright and lively, a woman who is an achiever and knows the origin of gaslighting and makes casual references to the film Poltergeist. And even then, does he really want such a woman, or is he simply enamored with this woman because of the plain gold band on her left hand, the casual reference to her kid, and her utter indifference to him? There comes a moment in life when everything is the road not taken, when it's just fork after fork after fork.
Wow. That is really cool. You created this character of Jerry Anderson, but you say you don't like him much?
Nope. No, I have a lot of empathy for him. He's pretty unlikable. I mean, he has a few good qualities. His devotion to his mother is admirable. I agree with him a lot about the art of fiction writing. A lot of his opinions are my opinions. We would be kindred spirits on that score, but I find him to be pretty awful. I mean, you know, Tess is right. You don't get to be 61 with 3 marriages behind you and, you know, assistants that you've slept with and a colleague that you've had an affair with. And I don't think anyone gets to be 61 without having made some enemies. It's really hard to do. I'm basically the same age as Jerry. I've got enemies. If I started getting strange letters and phone calls in the night, I could make up a quick list of some people I think would wish me harm.
I don't think I have any enemies because I'm too boring. You also said, I was looking at some of your past interviews, and you also said that it took you many books to feel free to tweak your writing process. So what do you think is the biggest change you've made since writing your first book?
I think I do think we tend to get a little bit, what's the word I'm reaching for? We tend to sort of enshrine our writing process and be very scared, you know, if something's not broke, you know, don't fix it. But life has come at me with a series of curveballs, and, you know, March 2020, all of a sudden, after many years of having a system in which I took my daughter to school, dropped her off, had all morning to write, I didn't have that anymore. I had a kid who was up on the guest room going to virtual school. And that meant I had to be kind of on duty at like 8:30. So I went back to where I had started when I had a full-time job at the newspaper. I got up and I wrote very early in the morning so I could go to my day job knowing that I'd gotten my writing done. So I found myself back at that process, and I was getting up at 5, walking, and then writing until my daughter got up about 8. And I was like, oh, this works too. I mean, nothing's magic. Nothing's, you know, I think it's a danger to become so committed to our rituals that we begin to think we can't function any other way. I think we do have to be a little more nimble than that. I mean, again, if people have a process that's working for them, don't change it. I didn't change of my own volition, but when I had to change, it was gratifying to find out I could change.
Cool. Very good. Okay. Oh, wait, I had one more question. I'm fascinated by your collection of essays about my life as a villainess.
Yeah.
First, can you explain the title?
Well, the title came from a never published essay about the end of my first marriage, in which I had to, again, talking about, do you have enemies if you've lived a long life? I had a marriage that ended and there were no kids and it wasn't that high stakes. But there came a moment when I had to realize that if my ex got to tell the story, I was the bad guy. Like, I'm the bad guy. So I had always avoided writing personal essays. And as I said, this one had never been published. And then a couple of years ago, I always feel obligated to note that I was drinking when this happened. And I was reading, I was alone, my daughter was asleep. And I was reading this wonderful special section on long reads called Fine Lines. It's all about being older. And I felt like I have an essay in me about being an older mom that nobody else can write, because no one else is living this crazy, because my kid was born when I was 51. You know, I'm dropping her off at school and I'm like old enough to be the mom to a lot of the other parents. And like, I mean, that's not an exaggeration. Like one of the women I liked best at the school, she moved since, was like, she's young enough to be my kid. And like my kid, if I had a graduate degree. And so I just wanted to write that story. And I because I was buzzed, I DM'd on Twitter the editor of that section, which was incredibly unprofessional and should not have worked. But she gave me a contract to write about that. And it was a really popular essay. And they continued to give me contracts. And my longtime editor, I've had the same editor my entire career as a novelist, she said, you need to do an entire book of these essays. That's what happened. But that first essay that really launched this was called Game of Crones. And it's just about being the oldest mom in the world and trying to get through February when school is closing because of snow, and you find out on February 13th that you need 24 Valentines for the next day. And they're not picking up my garbage. And everywhere I go, people are like, oh, cute kid, are you her grandmother? And it was just like, so I really needed to tell that story. I don't feel the same pressing need to write personal essays anymore. I think I got them all out for now. But it was a fun period, just producing a lot of personal stuff for a little bit of time.
Very cool. Okay, now we'll move on to Andrea, who puts her experiences as a travel writer to work in We Were Never Here. I love that title. In which two besties are backpacking in Chile when Emily discovers the body of the backpacker Kristen has killed, purportedly in self-defense. Emily might be more able to cope with that if the same thing hadn't happened on their last trip, making her wonder how many secrets one person can keep. So I am dying to hear part of We Were Never Here.
Great. Well, I'm going to start reading right at the beginning. That's an incredibly hard act to follow, Laura. So no thanks for that. But I'm just going to read a few pages and then we can chat a bit more about it. Kristen trotted to the patio's edge and crouched, long arm outstretched. Her fingers groped along a vine, lifting leaves, exposing the tender stalks beneath. I pictured her tipping over and tumbling off, there and then not there, the after image of her silhouette still hanging in my vision. I don't know why. For a wild moment, I pictured pushing her. Instead, I half stood from the table. Kristen, don't, I called. The wooden patio perched on stilts above the vines below, and we were alone, as we had been almost everywhere we'd stopped this week. Empty restaurants, empty markets, empty tourist information centers, an occasional cluster of other visitors standing or sitting nearby, despite everyone having all the space in the world. A snapping sound, and Kristen stood, holding up a blob of green grapes. She popped one into her mouth and chewed thoughtfully. Not bad, catch. I missed the toss, and the grapes bounced onto the glass tabletop. I glanced around and tried one. It burst bright and tart on my tongue. He said their yield sucks this year. You didn't need to take an entire bunch. She sank into her chair and lifted her pisco sour, lime green and frothy. I'll leave him a few extra pesos on the way out. I was hungry. She nudged her glass against mine. You'd rather see me steal some grapes than get low blood sugar, right? Fair point. Hangry Kristen could cut to the core. A man with a bandana looped around his head was watching us from far out in the field. just before the grapevines bumped up against a row of bushy trees. Beyond that, braided hills cut a jagged horizon. Kristen waved at the worker and he nodded. I let the last of my drink linger on my tongue. We'd been sipping these daily, lime juice, powdered sugar, and a yellowish brandy the Chileans swore predated Peruvian pisco. I felt the swell of yet another one of those, well, isn't this nice moments, one blissfully free from the fear that had prickled my brain nonstop for the last 13 months. Here I was on the trip of a lifetime, 7 nights in South America, exploring the rough mountains and the ripe valleys between with my best friend of more than a decade. A cocktail so bracing and sweet, it tasted like stepping into the surf. And we still had 2 nights to go. Kristen made everything better, her confidence like a bell jar of security in a strange and gnarled world. When we'd hugged at the airport almost a week ago, tears of relief had coated my eyes. I hadn't seen her in a year pockmarked by panic attacks, nightmares, and screaming into my pillow or the shower or occasionally my fist. But in Santiago, as we picked up our rental car and driven north on barren highways, Kristen was her usual boisterous self. She whooped when the Pacific came into view. She honked at a clump of plush alpacas by the side of the road. She pointed and gasped at roadside fruit stands, rippling cornfields with laser straight rows, fat fields of vegetables growing bushy in the sun, and sky, so much blue sky, almost crackling in its crispness, the way it shot down into the ocean on one side and the crinkled peaks on the other. Her presence was like a calming scent, aerosolized annex, and I allowed myself to relax. I'll leave with that.
Very cool. So we know there's going to be a dead body turning up here soon. Did you run across mysterious deaths when you were a travel writer? Did you run across a story that inspired this maybe or gave you the idea?
So I didn't actually encounter any dead bodies, thankfully. But I do have a close friend who lives in Australia, like Kristen does. And like the 2 main characters, we sort of keep up our friendship by doing these annual trips. And that is where her likeness to Kristen ends. No dead bodies. But we actually did go to Chile's Elqui Valley together in early 2019. It was equally sort of empty and it was the shoulder season. And because of that, we befriended the one other tourist in the area. Pretty much as soon as we got there, we found each other. And he was this backpacker named Steven from Australia. And he was so awesome. The 3 of us immediately felt like we'd known each other forever. We, went stargazing together. We would just hang out in our hotel suite together, could just talk nonstop. And he was actually so non-creepy and non-scary that we immediately had a running gag about how he was just playing this long game and he was at any point going to like kill us and steal our money and run off with our possessions. And he was just so great that we kept being able to joke about that. It was just happened on the first day and kept happening. And it was the last night and we were drinking Chilean wine in the hotel suite that my friend and I had because all the bars were closed. And he once again, somebody made a joke again about him actually being out here to steal us and run off, to steal our money and kill us and run off. And because I'm a thriller writer and my brain works in mysterious ways, I just kind of tilted my head and I said, Steven, like you've known us exactly as long as we've known you. And you didn't actually see me pour your wine glass that you're drinking right now when I was in the kitchen. So what makes you so convinced that you shouldn't be afraid of us? And this long silence ensued. And finally he was like, in his Australian accent, he was like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't have an answer. And it just struck me that it was such a given that the violence was going to be coming in one direction. Like women need to be afraid of men. And of course, as a travel writer, I am constantly traveling, often alone or just with a female friend. And I'm hearing these messages of, you're so brave, you should be careful. Did you see that, list of safety tips for female travelers? And it's always this idea that like women, it's just a given that women are going to be these victims of violence. And so I thought, what's a way that I could turn that idea on its head and female travelers could, have some reason to actually kill a backpacker and nobody would even suspect it because we never think of the arrow going that way. So the idea did come from a trip to Chile, but no actual bloodshed in my case.
Oh, well, that's preferable, I'm sure. Very preferable.
Definitely. That's good for me.
So I asked Laura about the decline in print media, but I wrote a novel that revolved around a newspaper. So you worked in so many magazines as they fell one by one. What do you think are the major factors that figured into that, caused that change?
That is a huge question.
Yes, it's
I think,
very sprawling.
Yeah.
Topic.
But I think media, and I think this envelops both the magazines and newspapers, I think media never really figured out. We started giving away articles for free. You could read the great article from the New Yorker or the New York Times or whatever that everyone's talking about. We started giving away media for free, and then we never figured out how to charge for it. So I like to look at like music, and it could have been such a similar thing. In fact, it was when we had Napster and LimeWire, and there was just this free for all. But then they figured out a way that everyone was happy enough with that they could charge us. You can get a flat fee and get it from Apple Music or Spotify or whatever you want. And media never figured out how to do that. So it became a really hard thing to monetize, and there's many factors, and the move toward video and how Facebook lied about video views. And I won't go into the nuts and bolts, but I do think it's really sad because especially magazines were so carefully fact-checked. That's actually why in The Lost Night, my debut, like my heroine is a fact checker, because I thought a fact checker would make a really great sort of amateur detective seeking the truth. But everything that runs in a magazine, for most magazines, has been meticulously fact checked. And of course, anyone can say anything on the internet. So I think readers sort of are the ones that bear the brunt of that, because they can read up on health information or all sorts of really critical information, and they don't have that assurance that it's really reliable and verifiable information anymore. So if you like magazines, pay for them, pay for journalism, please.
And Jenny typed in a question that she'd actually like to ask all the authors and now, of course, because I'm in menopause, it went completely out of my head. Every one of your books really blends genres. So how do you view genre in terms of your work? Is the idea of genre a cage or an apt descriptor?
I think it can be a cage, and I think it can be a dangerous thing that when you're even pitching your book, your agent and your editor need to feel really clear about what section of the bookstore it's going to go in. I think of myself as generally writing thrillers. People are quite confused by my books because they want to call it domestic suspense, because they're sort of, cloistered and relationship focused, but they don't center around, at least so far, none is centered around a romantic relationship. They're not about, the bored housewife or the ex-wife or the widow or something that would make it technically domestic suspense. And so I kind of feel like I'm doing my own thriller over here, like single lady noir or something. But yeah, I think it's helpful because there's a reason that we are all on this amazing panel together, and I am like meeting my speaking in tandem with my legends, and that's incredible, and we all do write thrillers in that sense. But I see mine as genre bending, and I think you need to have sort of your own author brand, and that is the genre of like what can readers follow you for and expect. But I think it gets more tricky when you're trying to like match your own books with what every other author is doing, so that it's clearly sort of categorizable.
Yes, very difficult. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to Dr. Kathy Reichs. Her 20th, count them, 20th Temperance Brennan book, The Bone Code. In this book, when a medical waste container with 2 bound bodies washes up on a barrier island, Tempe recognizes the method as similar to a 15-year-old case. But even worse, it may relate to the disease now ravaging Charleston, written before anyone had ever heard of COVID. So, Kathy, can you please read us a sample of The Bone Code?
I will. What's happening here, and I just kind of pulled this out because I didn't know I was reading, I think, is that Tempe has just survived with her cat a hurricane and got a call from her friend Anne down in Charleston saying, please come help me. I've had lots of damage because of this hurricane. So she's headed down to Charleston. Driving across town was an experience I don't wish to repeat. Broken branches and downed trees littered the streets, requiring U-turns and rerouting at several points. Traffic lights were malfunctioning at many intersections, forcing drivers to figure things out for themselves. Some were better at that than others. Normally, it's 20 minutes from the annex to I-77. That morning, it took 60, with Birdie yowling the whole way. 3 hours after leaving Charlotte, I'd exited I-26 and gone several miles along I-526 when my phone rang for the third time that day. Area code 843. That call would send my life off kilter for weeks and alter my worldview forever. Temperance Brennan, I answered using speakerphone. Dr. Brennan, my name is Ebony Heron. The voice was gravelly, neither high nor low. Based on pitch and cadence, I thought the caller might be Black and male. Wasn't sure on either. I'm the newly elected Charleston County Coroner. How can I help you, Dr. Heron? No need for titles. I'm an RN. How can I be of help? Sir, madam, I called your office in Charlotte, got forwarded to Dr. Nguyen. She told me you were heading to Charleston. Yes. Tires humming as I rolled across the bridge spanning the Wando River. Glancing south, I saw the quayside cranes at the Wando Harbor, dark and bony against the pinks and yellows of the fading day. As I'm sure you're aware, we've had no resident forensic anthropologist in South Carolina for many years. But I noted from old reports that you've done consults for my predecessor. Yes, wary. I have a situation that requires your expertise. I'm listening, not wanting to. Last night's hurricane tossed a container ashore down near the battery. I won't burden you with details on the phone, but a couple of kayakers found the thing early this morning, pried off the lid, and spotted what they thought was a body. They called the cops called me. My investigator collected the container and transported it to the MUSC morgue. There are actually 2 people inside. Just eyeballing the bulk, it looks to me to be 1 adult and 1 kid. Any possibility of visual IDs? Seriously, Brennan, if that were the case, why would Heron be contacting you? The amount of mass tells me decomp will be far too advanced. Any personal effects, clothing, jewelry, etc.? Both bodies were wrapped in plastic sheeting secured with electrical wire. I didn't want to do too much poking around, but I peeled back enough to see that at least the one is nude. From nowhere, a flashback image. A woman, a child, a plastic container washed from the sea. My gut clenched and my mouth went dry. I swallowed. Any clues to cause of death? I caught a better glimpse of the one body because of the kids pulling on the wrapping and me tugging at it a bit more. Looks to be a single bullet to the head. Also, the fingers and teeth are gone. It can't be. You'll need a pathologist, I said, sounding calmer than I felt. I like a guy named Klopp. I've left him a message suggesting y'all meet at the hospital tomorrow. I'll text him the time he's available. Fine. A detective named Vislowski came to the scene, not sure about her stomach for autopsies. A brief pause, then, tell me what you need. I did, and we disconnected. Moments later, I crossed the bridge connecting Mount Pleasant to the Isle of Palms. Salt marsh stretched to the horizon on both sides, tranquil and still. Here and there, I saw a wink of white, an ibis or egret, fading into shadow along with the spartina grass in which it stood. I turned onto Palm Boulevard, a single phrase ricocheting in my head, a mantra born of foreboding. It can't be. It can't be.
That's it. That sounds really cool. I'm curious about the title, actually. What is the significance of the title, The Bone Code?
Well, I try to use a little different science in each of the books. I write murder mysteries, but the solutions are science-driven. This one has a lot to do with the human genome. My ideas come from what we called in the writer's room for Bones, ripped from the headlines. This one was. And I read a little story about a Chinese scientist who had, against all ethical agreements among genetic scientists, everyone had agreed, even though we know the genome, it's all mapped, and we have the technology to change it with CRISPR, we're not going to do that. We're not going to create designer babies. Well, this Chinese doctor went ahead and did that. He altered the genomes of 2 unborn babies. So I saw that little story in the media and I thought, well, there's an idea. What if someone took this knowledge and took this technology and used it for nefarious reasons? So that's kind of the theme through. So the bone code reflects the genetic code. My cat has joined us.
I see that. That's okay.
Right.
And you were on an episode of Bones, which you looked great, by the way, but you said you only agreed to do it because David Duchovny directed that episode, which I am totally down with that. Were you an X-Files fan? And what did you say when you...
David Duchovny fan. I got 2 weeks sitting between David Boreanaz and David Duchovny. And it was also the first episode in which Ryan O'Neal appeared. So it, it was
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a fun time, I bet.
It was. The whole experience with Bones was a fun time.
Mm-hmm. And you got to do that Fabulous Authors USO tour in Afghanistan, but you said you did it under 40 pounds of body armor and a helmet?
Yeah.
Last year, I was issued a bulletproof vest for the first time in my career, and it's heavy. What was that?
These have these like blocks of lead or whatever that you put in them. So it's
Right.
literally, it's 40 pounds of stuff. Sandra Brown and I were the 2 women on the tour, and Sandra weighs about 12 pounds to begin with. So
Yes.
putting that stuff and trying to stand up was quite a challenge. I've been watching these film clips of our troops leaving Bagram Air Force Base this past week, and that's where we went. And so it's kind of, I don't know, nostalgic, I guess.
Was it uncomfortable in the Middle East heat? Was it super hot when you were there, or not so bad? Or
it wasn't super hot. I remember when we were in Kyrgyzstan as well, and there it was cold. It actually snowed, and then we flew into Afghanistan. It was much warmer, and as we'd go out to forward operating bases on Black Hawk helicopters and things, and as we went to certain areas north, I guess it was hot up there, but it wasn't so bad at Bagram.
And Karna has a question. Our own Karna Bodman has a question for you about CRISPR. And she researched the work to use it to save children's rare and inherited eye disease. Did you learn about that too? Or you?
Yeah, it's been used.
Heard of that?
Certainly being used for pigmentosis. Yes, I'm aware of that. And right now, the name of the disease has escaped me. Probably Tess would know that. But it is being used in sickle cell anemia, for example, and it is being used medically. But there was just this agreement. We're not going to go in and change a baby's genome just to do it.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We're going to go now to Gary and Tess. In Choose Me, a beautiful college senior's apparent suicide leads the detective to her lead suspect, a college professor who knows more than he's telling. So who's going to read to us from Choose Me?
I think
I'll
that's
start because my scene comes earlier.
Okay.
Okay, it's your first introduction to a student named Taryn Moore. And well, here we go. No one knew she was there. No one ever would. At 9:30 in the morning, all the tenants in the second floor should be out of the building, and by now, Liam was headed to his econ class at the far side of campus. After econ, he had German 3, then he'd eat lunch, probably his usual sub sandwich, and then it would be poli-sci. Taryn knew every detail of his schedule, just as she knew every inch of this apartment. She turned the key, pushed open the door, and stepped inside. When she took a deep breath, what she smelled was him, the velvety steam that still lingered after his morning shower, the citrus notes of his Sauvage aftershave, the yeasty scent of the whole wheat toast he always had for breakfast, all the smells she missed so much. Everywhere she looked brought back a happy memory. There was a sofa where they used to spend Saturday nights watching cheesy horror flicks. There was bookshelf where their photo was once prominently displayed. In that photo taken the summer they both graduated from high school, they were standing on Bald Rock Mountain with their arms around each other, his windblown blonde hair lit up like a golden halo. Liam and Taryn forever. Where was that photo now? Where had he hidden it? Unsettled, she went into the bedroom where on weekend nights their cast-off clothes used to lie tangled like lovers on the floor. She opened the closet and surveyed his shirts lined up on hangers, some of them still draped in plastic from the laundry service. She plucked up a sleeve and pressed her face to the crisp cotton, remembering all the times she used to rest her head against his shoulder. But these freshly laundered shirts smelled only of soap and starch, anonymous smells. She went into the bathroom. In the toothbrush holder where hers used to perch, his toothbrush now stood alone and forlorn, missing its mate. She lifted the lid to the laundry hamper, dug through the dirty clothes and pulled out a t-shirt. She buried her face in it and the scent intoxicated her. He had so many other t-shirts, he would never miss this one. She stuffed it into her backpack to keep as her secret Liam fix, something to tide her over while they played out this farce of taking a break from each other. Surely the separation wouldn't last much longer. They'd been together so long they'd grown into a single organism, their flesh melded, their lives forever bound. He just needed time to realize how much he missed her. She stepped out into the hallway and quietly pulled the door shut. Except for stealing his t-shirt, she'd left everything exactly as she'd found it. Outside, an icy wind swept through the buildings, between the buildings, and she pulled up the hood of her jacket. If she hurried, she could still make it to class in time. That's your introduction to Taryn Moore.
Very, very cool. So was Gary going to read some too, or we don't need, I mean, you don't have to. I just wanted to make sure. And so you wrote this book with you writing the female characters and Gary writing the male character. And Gary, you discussed in an interview earlier about how the academic world has changed and how the penalties for fraternization is more likely to be enforced now. I mean, when I was in college, my modern novel teacher had married her college professor who also taught there, and you know, and no one really thought it was strange. Of course, it was far in the past when I got there. So have such romances these days just gone farther underground, or maybe done the opposite, go totally above board and in full view just to avoid getting fired?
The rule is compliance with the Board of Federal Department of Education is you cannot date a student over whom you have supervisory power, such as grades or a thesis advisor or anything like that. So, I mean, back when you're talking about the old days, students and professors dated. They married each other. I can say, while I was thinking about this, I recall at least 3 colleagues of mine had ended up marrying students, and they were dating them while they were students of those professors. And the last to come under Title IX was, in fact, gender discrimination. And it is a matter of discrimination if it is favoritism. So if you are dating, romantically involved with a student, of course you're going to get the A's, no matter what. And that is just so unfair to everyone else. And it was only in the last 20 years or so that Title IX actually came down hard. If you are caught dating someone over whom you have these powers, you will be fired. And it's just, you know, absolute. And that's recent. So you can date someone in another department, I suppose it's done. It's not forbidden, but you can't date one of your own. And that is, you know, you'll be terminated. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you said you've gotten book ideas from the prevalence of TV commercials and from CNN factoids that you saw on television. And Tess, you said you get a lot of ideas from the National Enquirer. So where did the idea for Choose Me come from?
It was hatched over a cocktail party in Boston, in a bookstore, and I was following the Me Too movement at that point. It was in the news, and I thought, you know, it's interesting that every relationship has a male point of view and a female point of view, and they may not agree on what happened between them. wouldn't it be interesting to have a book where a man wrote the male point of view and a woman wrote the female point of view, and let's just see how that relationship works. And it was, we were drinking. And then next thing I know, Gary sends me a chapter told from the point of view of Jack Dorian, the professor. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I'll write the next chapter. And that's how it happened. We're playing off each other, and we wanted to see how this relationship worked out. And in truth, we had our characters torment each other. It was a great deal of fun. So whatever Jack and I one-upped him with Taryn.
Right.
The only thing we agreed on at the very beginning was that Taryn would end up dead. But the question was, did Jack do it? And we didn't know. We didn't know who the killer was until 2/3 of the way through the first draft. So that's how the project came out. It was he said, she said.
In fact, that was a working title we had too. About 10 of them. Yeah.
So Tess, I'm curious about, you wrote the music for your novel, Playing with Fire. I mean, I took up my grandfather's violin about 5 years ago, and I'm still like absolutely horrible. So did you start with the violin as a child, or?
I started with the piano, but that music was it was a very strange project, because Playing with Fire, the plot came to me in a nightmare. And it was about a haunted piece of violin music that would make this 3-year-old girl go berserk and start committing violence. So I was writing halfway through that story, and I was describing this piece of music in great detail, a fictional piece of music. And I had another nightmare, and I woke up with a nightmare in my head. So really, I feel as if my subconscious composed it. And because I play the piano, I was down and write the music out within a couple of weeks. And that's how it was all through dreams. It was a very, very strange project that's never happened to me before, with a lot of weird, almost metaphysical things that came out afterwards. So I don't know how to describe that or how to explain that particular project, but it almost felt like somebody was talking through me.
And we all loved Rizzoli and Isles, of course, but I've seen the horror movie. I watched the horror movie that you wrote with your son, Island Zero.
Yes.
which your son directed. So how fun was it to make a film with your child?
Well, it was a lot of fun, but I learned how difficult it is to make a film on a limited budget, and how difficult it is to work with the Screen Actors Guild. Because there is so much to do with accounting that's involved with just dealing with SAG. And we wanted to SAG because they have their actors, you're going to get a good actor. We tried to cast as much as we could from the state of Maine, but then you're dealing, we have some good actors here, but they tend to be community theater people, and they're not like people who actually have their SAG card.
Right.
We also found how difficult it is to build a monster. We did, so we had to build a sea monster, and it's still sitting in my closet. The monster, weird polyethylene, I don't know what you'd call it, but anyway, we did have a lot of fun, and I learned to respect my my son's ability especially as a cinematographer.
Cool. Well, Chris has a question for everyone. She knows Tess and Kathy have long-running TV productions, and Laura has had one of her books made into a feature movie, which I also saw. What is it like seeing your characters brought to life? Did they seem like the characters you wrote, or did the writers and actors put a different spin on them? Anyone?
In my case, it was both. The Temperance Brennan on television was different from the Temperance Brennan in the books. She was younger, she was taller, she was better looking, for one thing. But they also had commonalities, the passion for their work and their dedication to justice for the dead and for the living who are left behind. So I'd have to say it goes both ways. They were different, but they were also the same.
My TV characters are completely different from the books. I mean, Jane Rizzoli is an ordinary, short, young woman who doesn't dress well and has, out of control hair. And here comes Angie Harmon. 6 foot tall, a former model, looks absolutely gorgeous. And then my Maura Isles is, I always think of her as like a goth kind of Catherine Zeta-Jones type. And then they cast a beautiful sunny blonde for that part. But that's just what happens. And you know, if you're going to sell your books to television, just be grateful that somebody bought them, and if you know that it's going to change. I like to say that I raised these girls, and then they went off to college, and somebody else did something else with them. So.
I'm a big believer that adaptation should be adaptation. I want to see people take bold risks with my work, and I'm not allowed to talk about it yet, but it will be announced at some point that a certain actress will be playing a certain part in one of my books. Could not be more different from what I created, and I could not be more thrilled. So I want them to rethink the book. I want them to translate it to a visual medium. I'm very unattached to the look of anybody. To me, that's just not that important. I mean, in Every Secret Thing, a white cop became a black cop. It's a fine choice. And I really understood the choice. It was a good choice, actually, by the filmmakers. And you could do just about anything to my characters and my stories, and I would be okay with it if it worked.
Cool. And they're going to be making Lady in the Lake, which I'm reading right now and completely fascinated.
I have to say that one they cast brilliantly. When I found out that Natalie Portman would play Maddie and Lupita Nyong'o was going to play Cleo, I was like, yeah, that'll work.
Yes. Yes, that will definitely work. It's funny, I saw Every Secret Thing. I was just like flicking through cable, through the guide to see what was on, and found that, and I'm like, that sounds kind of familiar. And it's like, okay, well, it's a thriller, so I'll watch. And then it started, and I'm like, wait a minute, I know what this is. Okay, quick round robin, plotter or pantser? Andrea, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm a pantser to the max, which is, I hate myself for it. I wish I could write an outline and stick with it, but total pantser. I need to just start with a hook and figure it out by writing it. Should I pass it on? I'll pass it on to Laura.
Pantser who, in the middle of being a pantser, tries to assert order over the chaos, and it goes about as well as you would think.
Okay, next.
I'm the bottom row, so I'm a pantser. Okay. I do maybe 6 chapters of outline, and then I just take it from there. But I do kind of a postmortem outline. Every time I finish a chapter, I put a little blurb as I create the outline, chapter by chapter by chapter, after I've written it. So by the end of the book, I have a chapter so I can go back and see what's happening where.
Yeah.
I'm a pantser. I write exactly like the rest of you do. I mean, just you get that idea, you just want to see how that happened, you want to follow those characters, and everything becomes clear by about 2/3 of the way through the story.
And Gary, with your books?
I do a scant outline, and I start writing it as long as I have some kind of an arc. And when I get to about the 2/3 point, I usually can trust that I know how to end it, even though I've not outlined it to the end. And I have little epiphanies, and sometimes it works out.
I don't know how any of you can do that. I always know how it's going to end, who did it, who dies, why, the major clues. I don't think I can function any other way. Okay, well, let's go back. We have just a few minutes left, but let's go back to Jenny's question, which we heard from Andrea, but nobody else, about genre. Do you think genre, and what do you feel about genre in terms of your work? And is it restrictive, or is it helpful, or what do you think? Kathy. Sorry, Laura, you start.
I was going to say it's a marketing category. I think it's useful for readers because readers do self-identify as liking certain things, and they should be able to find those things in the bookstore. Lately I've taken to sort of throwing down in a provocative way and quoting Nick Hornby. Nick Hornby has had a column for a long time, I think it was in The Believer, about books that he bought and books that he read. And he wrote about Mystic River, that it seemed to him that Mystic River did everything you would require of a literary novel and more. And it's like, if you do those two things, isn't it like angels dancing on the head of a pin? And in the end, aren't we punishing genre writers because they don't show their work? They're kind of unfussy and they're not putting on, and he's talking about, the tradition and classwork of you have to show how you got to the answer of the mathematical equation. And if you don't show your work, you don't get full credit. But he was arguing that people who don't show their work are doing something that's actually trickier. So I don't think that great crime novels transcend the crime genre. I think we should start talking about literary novels that transcend the literary genre and do other things as well as the other genres. I think a literary novel that can achieve as a crime novel, a romance novel, speculative fiction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you find a literary novel that can do the extra thing of satisfying genre fiction, that maybe that's the greatest novel of all. And I'm just going to stick with that because, I just like to piss people off.
Well, you didn't piss me off, that's for sure. I totally agree with you.
Nobody here, but you know what I mean? It's like the
really
idea that.
Yeah, it's a marketing tool. It's a way for readers to identify what kind of book this is. And as I get older, I start to really not care anymore. Because I've written science fiction and historical and romance and mystery, and to me they're all the same. They're really all the same. It's just about telling a good story about good characters. But you need to know what the genre is so they know what part of the book story.
One of the greatest novels ever written, in my opinion, is Possession by A.S. Byatt, which has mystery, historical fiction, pastiche of romantic poetry. I think I have the genre right. Academic satire. I mean, it's like if she could have just gotten science fiction in there. I love that book so much. And I really think it's something to aspire to just, and it's why, my latest book, it was like, can I get some horror in there? Can I do that? It's like, oh, it turns out, yeah, you can inject a little horror into the crime fiction and then it'll still stay afloat.
Cool.
I've taken a more academic point of view. My books are sometimes under thrillers, sometimes under mysteries, and so there's a confusion there. And so I just try to decide what are the engines that pull a mystery versus the engine that pulls a thriller. The engine that pulls a mystery is puzzle solving. The engine that pulls a thriller is dread. And Tess and I wrote a book that is a thriller wrapped around a whodunit. There's an element of dread toward the end, and the whole whodunit pulls you right to the end. Who did do it? So I think they're hybrids sometimes, and I agree. I teach horror fiction and science fiction at Northeastern, and some of the best horror novels are very literary. I taught Pet Sematary for several years, Stephen King's novel, and it is driven by character. What happens inside the character as opposed to random things happening on the outside. And that is literary. And that is what defines, in many ways, novels of character. That the internal changes in the character, what moves the narrative along.
Okay. Kathy, did you weigh in on this?
I didn't, but whatever they said, I'm good with that. My mind, I'm trained as a scientist and my mind works that way. So I like things that can be organized and categorized. And if they're all slippery, it's kind of like Temperance would say on television. She doesn't like psychology because it's just too soft and the boundaries are too slippery. So I like to know where I'm going in a bookstore and I like to know what kind of book I'm going to find there. So I don't mind genreization, I guess.
Very cool. Okay, Chris wants to know how big is your cat?
He's 16.6 pounds. I know
Wow.
because he just went to the vet. His name is Skinny.
Okay, well, very nice to meet you, Skinny. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, but this has been absolutely fabulous. Thank you to our great authors for this wonderful event, and thank you to our viewers for joining us. Next month, tune in on August 16th to hear from John David Mann and Brandon Webb, Zoya Stage, and Sandra Brown. So we can ask Sandra Brown about the body armor in Afghanistan.
My roommate. Yes.
Her opinion. Okay, good night. Thank you.
Thank you.